So when you're hooking him up, he will not. It won't come out.
And then when he's ready to go,
You just unmute it.
So up through the jacket or like
Whatever he would prefer.
okay.
Usually I let them decide as long as it's, up on top.
All right, let me go get him.
Okay, sure.
Tracy's gonna be
That is live, yes. You just press the red button. Is it almost time? Yeah, we have 4 minutes. Should I turn it on now?
yeah.
Okay.
So that's on.
Yes.
Will be for Cynthia, and then Tracy will pick it up after Cynthia, and then no, it'll be Cynthia, and then it'll be us.
Not yet. Good morning, everyone. I'm Cynthia Schneider, your CEO at the top of Virginia Regional Chamber, and it is my privilege to welcome you this morning to the first annual TVRC Economic Summit. Our expectation today is to take you to new heights. One of my favorite memories in my early career was going to my very first food show. I was in the specialty food industry, and arriving at the Jacob Javits Convention Center in New York and seeing all of my colleagues from around the world who were also producing food was so exciting for me, and it helped me to see beyond my little niche in my little corner of Winchester. And so today we hope to do that for you, take you a little higher, help you to give you a view beyond what you may see in your everyday. We have tremendous representatives here from the local area, from the state, and from the federal perspectives to help you understand what's happening in the economy, if there is any understanding that, right? To give you some new perspective, and hopefully our hope is that it will strengthen you and strengthen your business, which then strengthens our region and helps us to do what we do serving our community so well. So I want to give a real big thank you to Scott Harvard and all the colleagues at First Bank for being the impetus behind this economic summit and for being our major sponsor today. And also to Shenandoah University, who have been amazing collaborators, especially Hayden and Kathy. I want to thank you particularly, and Astrid Scheel, your vision in helping bring this all together. Thank you to Shenandoah University. I want to give a big shout out to Shenandoah today. Last week on Facebook, I saw somebody make a rude comment about Shenandoah taking over our community in some way, and I thought, I had to bite my tongue a lot. Because of the richness that Shenandoah University brings to us. Not only educationally, really right from the start, my children were enabled to take arts classes and dance lessons through the Shenandoah Conservative Arts Academy, right up to our master's levels programs and certifications that they're now offering to help strengthen the workforce. They bring to us sports and culture that you would not find typically in a community this size. And so thank you so much to Shenandoah University for hosting us today. And Astrid Scheel, Dean of the School of Business, is here to tell you a little bit about what they have going on. Astrid? Astrid was playing football the other day.
All right, we'll start with that. I fractured my elbow, and yeah, they finally figured out what it was. But I'm on the mend, and I apologize for my hair because I can't brush my hair left-handed. So the one good thing about a broken elbow is that I have an excuse now to go to the hairdresser once a week. So anyway, good morning, and welcome to the first of what we hope will be an annual event, the Economic Summit. And we're honored to be one of the hosts of this important event. We have an all-star lineup, as Cynthia mentioned today, and believe that if you are a business person or you are a business student, that there is no better place for you to be this morning than right here. So my name is Astrid Scheel, and I'm the Dean of the School of Business here at Shenandoah University, and it is my privilege to welcome you. And if you will indulge me for 1 minute, and I promise it's only 1 minute, I would like to share a few comments about what's happening here in the School of Business. Many of you know or have attended our annual business symposium, which brings together thought leaders from our region to discuss trending issues. This coming year, the Business Symposium will be on Friday, March 24th, and this year's theme is Leadership in Business. So leaning out a little further is our annual Legacy Golf Tournament, and that'll be on Thursday, May 11th at the Winchester Country Club. In the past 2 years, this sold-out golf event, which is run by business students, has raised $75,000 for scholarships for local students. So we hope you will consider joining us this coming year as a sponsor and signing up with a golf team. It's a lot of fun. The registration will open in early February. So here in the School of Business, we are changing. We're growing, we're expanding, and our vision of who we are and how we can best serve learners of all ages, that's what we're working towards in our community. Our partnerships are growing. We are most proud of our relationship with Navy Federal Credit Union and with Winchester Airport. We are now providing degree completion program with them. And by doing so, we're doing what we do best, serving and supporting the community and strengthening our local economy. We now also offer certificates in business essentials, data analytics, digital marketing, esports management, which I know you're all excited about, healthcare management, and we'll soon be offering a certificate in sustainable business practices. So if you'd like to learn a little more about that, just give me a call and let's talk. And let's see how we can support you in growing the community and our businesses here. So now it's time for me to welcome to the stage our visionary leader and president, Tracy Fitzsimmons.
Thank you, Dean Scheel. I appreciate you welcoming us to your building and to Shenandoah, and I appreciate Cynthia Snyder of the Chamber and Scott Harvard and all of our friends at First Bank. You have continually supported economic initiatives here in the Northern Valley and here at the institution, particularly ones that bring us together to think, and I'm deeply grateful for that partnership. Today we welcome the brightest economic minds in the Northern Valley and indeed from many different parts of Virginia to help us think about what's going on in the economy here locally in the state or Commonwealth and nationally. There are big questions. And scattered among you are our students who are joining us, some of our business school students and others today. Please do not disregard them and think that they're not bringing ideas, that they're only here to learn with you. They are also here to contribute ideas, and they have been bantering around the same questions that you have these last, 10, 11 months. Like, what is going on in our world and in our economy, right? How is it that we can have nearly full employment and be staring down a recession? How is it that the old standbys like bonds don't seem to be doing what we think they should do as our fallbacks? What's going on with the local real estate market? They really want to know why it's so hard to rent a place here locally, I can tell you. And what does all of this mean for student loans? What does all of this mean for their ability to get a job when they graduate? Now, they know they're lucky to be at a place that has an incredibly high number of students that get placed immediately upon graduation, 91% upon graduation, boom, in a job, and then in the next 6 months, that rest of that gap gets closed. They know they're lucky to be at a place that has the highest or among the highest pass rates of all of our health profession programs in the Commonwealth. And so they're ready not just to graduate, but to land a job because they've passed their boards. I have to tell you that what I love being at Shenandoah is that we're thinking about the same things you are thinking about. We're not in ivory tower. Our students don't come here simply to churn in their minds, but while they're learning, and yes, they're tackling big case studies, they're thinking about theories, but they're pursuing internships, and they're thinking about careers. And this isn't new to Shenandoah. We all know that to be prepared for the economic rapids that we're in or the political turmoil that we're in, you can't just change on a dime. You can't just start being ready yesterday. It's something that you're laying the groundwork months, years, decades earlier. And here at Shenandoah, we were never a liberal arts institution. We love the idea of thinking broadly. But our job has always been, since 1875, to prepare students deeply to get ready for a job and a career, and also to be learning those soft skills that will help them not just contribute to a corporation or an institution, but to be able to change jobs and careers down the road as new things come up. And so as Astrid said, that means we're always thinking about relevance. What does society need now, and what are they going to need in the coming years? And so that means that we adapt and change current programs, and we add new programs. So whether it be esports management, or it's data analytics or cybersecurity, or now artificial intelligence, adding master's levels programs like nutrition, or hopefully, it looks like, masters in mental health counseling to meet the needs of the community. Additional nursing programs like psychiatric nurse practitioner, or we have the only midwifery program in Virginia. But we're also looking at programs like engineering and speech language pathology, because we're thinking about what does society need, and we're hearing it from you all. If you have an idea for a program that our world needs, and that you think that there will be students interested, that we could find faculty to hire, and there will be jobs for them when they graduate, and that has deep societal need, those are our requirements. And then, yeah, we have to figure out how to afford it, but we can probably do that in partnership. If you have an idea for a program, will you let us know? Because one of the things our faculty is really incredible about is listening to students and listening to the community, and then devising programs, developing them that meet those needs. I couldn't be prouder than to be at a place like Shenandoah. And not only does all that happen, but anybody who lives in this community knows that this is an education-friendly Northern Valley. Between our amazing public school systems that are serving a wide diversity of people, our local community college, Laurel Ridge Community College, and Shenandoah, the partnerships, we just pass students along, they have a pathway, and they stay here to work and live and raise their families. And along the way here at Shenandoah, we are welcoming not just 4,100 students to study at Shenandoah every year, with a growing enrollment and a place that kept every single person fully employed at full pay during the pandemic and stayed open from June 2020 all the way through the rest of it. But this is also a place that every year welcomes tens of thousands of visitors, whether it to be to economic summits or summer music theater, or students bringing their parents, graduation, or prospective students coming to visit it, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those folks that come here and spend money in this community. That's money that stays here, that gets invested, that keeps our businesses open, helps our tax base, and we are happy to be part of that. We don't think that being part of higher education is about being too good to be part of the community. We feel like we thrive if the community thrives. And that's a really, really important partnership to us. So I'm delighted to be here with you today and with our students to learn and grow. Thank you.
All right, inspiring. And now it is my privilege to introduce to you the President and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, Jason Alkoubi.
Good morning. Let me see if this thing is on. Is it on? Awesome. I think I have some slides for you guys, but let me just tell you, it is such a pleasure to be here for this inaugural Economic Summit. Super excited about this, super excited to be in your region, in this community, at this amazing university. It's a very exciting time to be in Virginia, and I want to tell you a little bit about that. But as we get started, I just first of all want to tell you a little bit about VDP. I think many of you know. This is probably a clicker, isn't it? Let's see how this works. All right, I need a little help with this. Oh, is it working?
Down goes.
Oh, down goes. Oh, okay, down goes down. That's cool. Down is down, up is up. I want to just tell you guys a little bit about VDP. I think you guys know a bit about the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, but we've been up to a lot over the last few years to position ourselves as a stronger partner for communities, for regions, and for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I want to make sure you know about that progress. So let's talk a little bit about that. So first of all, I think most of you know that the Virginia Economic Development Partnership is the economic development arm of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We market the state as a business location, a place where existing businesses can expand and thrive, also a place where businesses from around the country and around the world can locate in a very high quality, competitive, business-friendly environment. So we market Virginia as an economic development destination. We also, of course, recruit businesses. One of the things that's not as well known, because it doesn't always get sort of the front page of the newspaper or the prominent spot on the nightly news, is that about 2/3 of the projects we work are expansions of existing Virginia businesses. 2/3 of the projects that we assist are existing Virginia businesses. We also have a very significant, high quality international trade team that helps hundreds of businesses, Virginia businesses, every single year export their goods and services to other markets around the world. It is a super productive, very helpful program. If you have businesses that are looking to tap into markets overseas, let me know. We will get them hooked up with that. A big part of what we do is we're charged with coordinating the overall ecosystem in Virginia. You guys know that this is a team sport, and so we play an important role in just coordinating that sort of ecosystem. A huge part of what we're focused on is not just marketing and selling the state, but also looking at the ways that Virginia can become more competitive, looking at our strengths, but also looking at our weaknesses. How do we stack up against other states for the kinds of sectors that we're trying to cultivate here in Virginia, looking for ways to accentuate our advantages, but also address some of the things that hold us back. We'll talk more about that momentarily. We've got a strong research team that not only supports our projects and helps partners, also we manage a number of performance-based incentive programs. One of the biggest places where we've added new capabilities just in the last few years, and part of this is because this issue has risen to the very top of the list for most competitive projects, is we've put a ton of energy into figuring out how Virginia can provide a very compelling, customized workforce solution for every project that's looking to expand here, for every project that's looking to locate here, as well as how do we position ourselves as a better partner for interpreting what's needed in terms of talent and in terms of workforce, working closely with public and private universities, working with the K-12 system, and so forth. And then finally, another place that has received a lot of energy over the last few years, a capability that we're really building and accelerating rapidly right now, is what we're doing around real estate solutions. I think many of you are aware that one of the biggest reasons Virginia currently loses projects, particularly in the advanced manufacturing space, so important to this region, but also other industrial projects, is because our inventory of project-ready sites, particularly large project-ready sites, is quite meager, and that's a place that deserves a lot of attention. We'll talk more about that momentarily. I do just want to emphasize and thank you guys for the opportunity to be here today. I mentioned that one of our key roles at VEDP is to play sort of a coordinating role in this team sport of economic development. It's something that we take very, very seriously, and so whenever I get invited to join a convening like this, I readily accept it. It's great to be with you. I want to thank those of you who are in the room, who are our partners every day. Of course, our education partners. I see Patrick Barker back there. Delegate, thank you for being here. Really, really important to embrace this partnership from the governor to the General Assembly to our regional partners, our local partners, our university partners, something we really put a lot of energy into. At VEDP, we are focused on cultivating a set of target industry sectors that will do a couple of things. One is we want to focus on sectors that will help position Virginia as a leading state for job growth. We want to go where the job creation is, and so we're definitely focused in on the sectors that we believe will have the highest share of traded sector job creation as we look into the future. I say traded sector because we're focused on things, by traded sector I mean businesses that export the majority, typically the vast majority, of their goods and services outside of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So they're primarily selling to customers outside the state. That's important because that brings wealth into the state, helps really support the growth of smaller businesses, businesses that really depend on local demand. Think about your restaurants, think about your retail. These are all industry sectors, all businesses that depend on local demand for their growth. And so what we're really trying to do here is go after competitive traded sector projects that increase that sort of local demand side and help not only other businesses grow, but that also create compelling economic opportunities for our citizens. So we're trying to do this for the state overall, but we also have, you'll see, this is a portfolio of sectors that is intended to be relevant to every part of Virginia. Every region, as you guys know, is a little bit different. Every region has special attributes, and so one of the things that we're trying to do with this portfolio of sectors is advance opportunities that will be relevant to every part of the Commonwealth, including this one. And you'll see on this list a strong emphasis on advanced manufacturing and other industrial sectors that have a special resonance in this region. And you'll see that in this next chart. What this is showing, you've got the different regions of Virginia going down the left-hand side here. You can see the northern Shenandoah Valley here, third from the top. And what this shows is basically over the last 5 years, the distribution of announced jobs for competitive economic development projects broken down by sector. The dark blue line is manufacturing, and I want to put special emphasis on that, not only because it represents the majority of economic development wins in terms of the breakdown of jobs in this region, but look at the importance of manufacturing across virtually every region of Virginia. One of the things that I believe we need to do as a state, if we are going to not only generate the ambitious job creation goals that Governor Youngkin has articulated, the aspiration of positioning Virginia as a leading growth state, we need to win these big job creating manufacturing projects to generate the economic momentum that Virginia desires overall. But for many, many regions in Virginia, including yours, winning in manufacturing is really essential if we want to position our regions for growth. Lastly, I'll just say, and this is a bit of an eye chart for those of you in the back, as we think about Virginia's competitive position, as we think about how we perform relative to other states, what our agenda should be in terms of policy, and that's something that the top of Virginia Regional Chamber is very engaged in. When we think about that agenda, we've got a ton of strengths in Virginia that we can articulate, a great value proposition for so many of the sectors that we were just looking at. But for each one of those strengths, there are also some corresponding weaknesses that offset it to some extent, and we really need to work on those things. The first one is something that I've already mentioned. We have a relatively meager inventory of large project-ready sites, particularly those that are larger than 250 acres. Part of that is just some natural topographical challenges that you guys are familiar with. We also historically have offered smaller incentive packages for competitive projects. That's something that's beginning to change. But you'll see as you look through this list, there are quite a few weaknesses or challenges that are particularly acute for manufacturing that we need to work hard to address. I will also draw special attention to this item. One of the I think pieces of low-hanging fruit for Virginia is that there is a pretty big gap between the reality of our strengths for these sectors that we're trying to attract and the perception of Virginia. Our value proposition is not as well known as that for some of our competitor states. And the reason is that Virginia historically and even today has not done a lot to market itself for economic development. We've done a great job of branding Virginia as a tourism destination. Virginia is for lovers. Everybody knows that, not just in this room, but around our country and increasingly around the world. But we've invested very, very little in marketing ourselves as an economic development destination for all of those other sectors that we were just looking at. That is why there is a big perception gap between perception and reality. The states that we're competing with, North Carolina, Ohio, South Carolina, Georgia, for these kinds of projects are investing several multiples of what we are in marketing for economic development purposes. So One of the big things that we are charged with at VEDP is developing what we call the comprehensive economic development strategy for the Commonwealth. This is the Commonwealth's overall economic development plan, something we take very seriously. We developed this for the first time in 2017. We updated it again during the pandemic, working with that list of partners and others that I was just talking about earlier. And through that process, we collectively, the big economic development team, have consistently articulated and embraced 5 big goals for Virginia's economic development. The first is to position Virginia as a robust state for job growth, to make Virginia among the top 5 to 10 states in percentage job growth, but also growth in median earned income. In other words, making Virginia not only a leader in job creation relative to other states, but also ensuring that the quality of the jobs that we're creating is advancing the state and it is sort of qualitatively better than what's happening in other states. Virginia historically has been a very modest growth state, so typically sort of in the 20s out of the 50 states. Secondly, as we've talked about that first big goal, a lot of regions have told us, look, it's not good enough for Virginia overall to be a leading state for job growth. We really want to participate in that. There were periods in our past where Northern Virginia alone represented something like 103% of the Commonwealth's entire growth. And if you think about what that means mathematically, it means on average the rest of the Commonwealth was declining. And so the second big goal is to position every region of Virginia to participate in the growth of the Commonwealth. It doesn't mean that every region is going to grow at the same rate. It doesn't mean that every region is going to grow in the same way. But what it does mean is that we want to make sure that each region of Virginia is in positive territory from a jobs growth perspective. If we do that for each region, what that means is that every person within that region, every business within the region will have access to the benefits of that growth within reasonable commuting distance. Thirdly, we want to retake our position as America's top business climate. On average, we want to be ranked consistently in the top 3 of the major business climate rankings. That's the primary way we look at it. It's obviously not the only way you can measure that. Fourth, we at VEDP want to be America's best state economic development organization, mostly so that we can be a strong partner in nailing those first 3 big goals. And then finally, we want to do it in a way that is super collaborative. We really want to put the P into VEDP, recognize that this really is a partnership. And as we think about our economic development enterprise, it's everybody in this room working together to achieve those big goals. What I will emphasize to you is that we have made substantial progress in the last 5 or so years on all of these big goals. I would say the last one is the only one that we can really say that we're kind of fully on track for, but I will tell you that we have seen Virginia accelerate its economic growth. And remember, what we're trying to do on this first big goal is to go from being kind of a middling state for job growth to being one of the fastest growing states in America on a consistent basis. That is a transformational change. One of the biggest places where we've seen improvement is on the second goal. When we started this work 5 years ago, only four regions out of 18 in Virginia were projected to be in positive territory. That number has increased considerably. It's about 15 today, so we've gone from 4 to 15 expected to be in positive growth territory. That's a huge increase. We've increased roughly 2 spots on average in the state business climate rankings, and we've done a lot of things, including some things I'll talk about momentarily, to make ourselves a stronger partner to you and to other organizations around the state. In the process, we've had a lot of success. We've announced a lot of big projects. I mean, you guys are undoubtedly familiar with some of the big ones like Lego. With Blue Star, just a year or so ago, we announced the single largest manufacturing project in the history of rural Virginia. This is just in the last year and a half or so. So just a lot of nice projects. And this is not everything. I asked when we first put this up, somebody said, "Hey, is that everything?" No, these are actually just some selected wins from the last year and a half. This is what the full map looks like. So we are seeing job-creating projects getting announced regularly in virtually every region of Virginia, including some nice ones here in this area, really advancing not only the advanced manufacturing presence, advanced materials here, but also some things that are really helping to diversify this economy and keep it growing. I mentioned that there's a number of things that we're doing at VDP to really keep up this momentum, and I just want to just focus you on these things for a second. These are some of the biggest things where we're trying to get even better. We're putting a ton of energy into sites right now, trying to close that gap. We are expanding those international trade services that I told you about a second ago. We want to serve hundreds of more Virginia businesses every single year. We are ramping up some of our workforce capabilities. One of the biggest things that we've done is we've created a fully customized, comprehensive recruitment and training service for businesses that are expanding or locating in Virginia. It's called the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program. It's only 3 years old, and it's already recognized as the #2 program of its kind in America. We're going to make it #1 really soon. We've launched the Virginia Office of Education Economics, or VOE, to help be an advisor and a compiler of great actionable data for how to kind of close the supply and demand gaps when you think about workforce and skills. Increasing capacity around business investment so we can put more horsepower into lead generation and really managing projects well, working with our regional and local partners, including those in the room. Doing a lot right now to support Secretary Karen Merrick and her team in developing the governor's comprehensive economic development policy. That's one of the first things that every administration has to do during their first year in office. A lot more focus on regional talent solutions and business outreach. In fact, my colleague Jason Smith is in the room here. For those of you who don't know Jason, somebody who really helps us stay connected to the different regions of Virginia. And then finally, I say not finally, but the last thing on this list of some of the key things we're doing right now, really putting a lot of energy into building our Virginia's relationship with site selectors. These are the folks who advise on roughly half of the big deals, helping basically consulting companies on their location decisions. So it's a very high leverage thing. I will say that virtually all of these things are things that we're able to do and that we're able to put more energy into, put more capacity into, because we've had great support from the General Assembly, great support from the administration. So Mr. Delegate, thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about the state of the economy. I suspect Tom Barkin is going to give you the master's level course on this later today, but let me tell you a little bit about Virginia's economy right now, just in terms of economic performance as I see it. So what you're looking at here is the Virginia employment line. This line represents employed Virginians. You can see the pre-pandemic baseline there, about 4.35 million Virginians employed prior to the pandemic. A precipitous fall in that April-May timeframe, and in Virginia a pretty slow climb back to our pre-pandemic baseline. In fact, for most of this period, Virginia was one of the slowest to recover states, not like 40, like 47 or so. Out of 50. I mean, relatively slow to get back. You can see that there's been a nice acceleration since January, so things are starting to look up. But we're still more than 100,000 jobs down. More than 100,000 fewer people employed in Virginia based on the latest data available than there were before the pandemic. What you're looking at here is what the numbers look like since January. So I mentioned that for that long slog, we were kind of sluggish and in the low 40s, in the high 40s in recovery in a bad way. Since January, about 100,000 jobs created in Virginia, 100,000 more employed persons. We've moved up significantly. We've gone from kind of the bottom of the bottom half to square in the middle of the top half of states. But it goes back to this point. We've got to find more energy in our economy. When you look at this by sector, these sort of shaded lines, this is what the percentage change was in employment by sector at the height of the pandemic. So think back to like April, May of 2020. The solid lines are where we are based on the latest data. And I'll just point out a couple of things here. One is that the sectors that were hit hardest at the peak of the pandemic, things like leisure and hospitality and other services, are still the hardest hit sectors. So the ones that were whacked the hardest initially are still the ones that are struggling to recover. The other thing I'll point out to you is that we're starting to see some green lines. So some sectors are growing. One of the most pronounced shifts I think we've seen, look at what's going on here. Information, transportation, warehousing, and utilities. A lot of that is the shift to e-commerce. A lot of that is the shift to e-commerce, the combination of the digitization of our economy as well as all of the sort of goods movement associated with e-commerce. I think a lot of that shift is here to stay. I mentioned that since January, we've had pretty strong job growth overall, nearly 100,000 more Virginians employed. You can see early in the year, really strong momentum. Virginia creating 15 to 20,000 jobs per month, 25,000 jobs in March, so really nice momentum. In August, we started to see some concerning signs. Negative numbers for August, slightly positive in September. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of a loss of momentum, and certainly consistent with some of what we're seeing in the national picture. But look at this. Look at this. These are basically hires and openings for Virginia firms. And one of the things I just want to show you is that look at this top line. This is openings throughout this period, including now. The number of openings remains quite high. And y'all, I see y'all nodding your heads, right? You are very familiar with this. So as we think about what does it take to inject more energy into Virginia's economy, a huge part of this today is just finding the people to fill those jobs that are open. Let's look at this a little bit differently. So these are the different occupation groups. This is Virginia data. What you're looking at here, these are unique active postings. These are job postings. And this is the postings per 100 existing workers in those occupations. So like for tech, for healthcare, for management occupations, you're seeing like 25 plus openings for every 100 existing workers in that occupation. Now think about what that means. What that means is that if you don't have 25 new people joining that occupation, right? If you don't have new people reskilling or choosing to join that occupation in large numbers, right? In large numbers, you're going to have employers just duking it out for market share for those folks. And look at computer occupations, all other, that third line. I mean, like basically, for every single worker employed in that occupational space today, there's another job opening. Really, really intense competition there. This is labor force participation, a measure of the number of the percentage of kind of working age people who are either who are in the labor market. Those are who are employed or looking for work. And you see, Virginia historically has been a pretty strong performer on this measure. Before the pandemic, a little bit north of 66% of able Virginians were in the labor market. That took a pretty sharp downturn, from 66 down to like 60, almost 62%. That might not seem like a big difference. That is a tectonic shift in the labor market. One of the big differences between Virginia and other states is not that we went down a bit in the pandemic. It's that this has been a measure that has been vexingly hard to recover from. Virginia went down with everybody else. Most of our competitors popped back up. For some reason, Virginians are not getting back into the labor market as much as what we're seeing from workers in other states. The other thing that we're seeing is pretty consistent out-migration from Virginia. This is what you're looking at here is net domestic migration. The difference between people, leaving Virginia for another state and people moving from another state to Virginia. So on net, Virginia is losing the net domestic migration game right now. And when you look at this regionally, I know everybody wants to look at the northern Shenandoah Valley at the top of Virginia area, and you should. You guys are in positive territory, and this is the most recent year of data. Positive territory in terms of population change, not because you're making tons of babies. The top right is the natural change, births minus deaths. So you're slightly negative there. About 100 more people died than were born in this region in the last year or so. But look at this shift. Nearly 3,000 more people moved in than moved out, and I know you're dealing with just kind of what that means and how do you manage that growth. But the other region I want to focus on here is your neighbor, Northern Virginia. Look at what's going on in Northern Virginia. Northern Virginia is having babies. 20,000 more babies than deaths in Northern Virginia in the last year. Yet, the total population change in Northern Virginia was more than 10,000 people lost. 10,000 reduction. And it's because of this. Look at what's going on with the domestic migration picture. 30,000 or so more people moving out than moving in. That's a pretty concerning statistic to me for our state's single largest economic engine. We can talk about why that is. I'm sure you guys, as their neighbor, have some thoughts. I think the cost of living probably has a very significant influence on what we're seeing there. Let me wrap up by just sharing a few trends. This is an economic summit, and so part of what I wanted to do today is just kind of give you the picture of the economy as I see it, but also point out some trends that I think we all ought to be thinking about, particularly those of us who are engaged in economic development. The first is one we've talked about already, labor force scarcity. There's some important implications here. One is that almost every employer is struggling to find and hold on to people. And one of the things that we're seeing as a result of that is many employers investing heavily in automation, making capital investments that enable them to do the same amount of production with the same or fewer people. That's particularly true for manufacturers. Every time I'm in a manufacturing plant, I ask the question, what's going to be different 5 or 10 years from now? Every single time they say it's going to be a lot more automated. They're investing heavily in that area. We're also seeing the upward wage pressure. We're also seeing sort of the bargaining power shift significantly, where your employee says, hey, I want to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. It's a lot harder to say no to that nowadays than it used to be. We've seen a marked increase in large projects. And when I say a very large project, a mega project, I'm talking a project that has 1,000 or more direct jobs associated with it, and or $1 billion or more in capital investment. It used to be that we might see 5 of these types of projects in a given year in Virginia, not very long ago, like 5 to 8 years ago. Nowadays, we're seeing like 25 to 30 projects of this scale. Like nearly every week, a project representing more than 1,000 jobs, more than $1 billion in capital investment, looking for a place to land, really gets us back to this conversation about mega sites. If we do not have an inventory of project-ready sites, it's going to be very hard for us to capture this activity. Speed to market is becoming paramount. Businesses are under incredible pressure to get their new operations up and running, to beat their competitors into the market. And those of us in economic development are having to respond to that. Those timelines are getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter to respond. And of course, communities that put themselves in a position to respond quickly and effectively and compellingly will be better positioned in this environment. Also, more and more companies saying that renewable energy or clean energy is not just a preference. In many cases, they're saying it is essential. We're seeing more and more projects, including big projects, say that they have to have renewables. We've also seen a significant decline in office projects. It used to be in Virginia that roughly half of the projects we were working at the state level needed, a certain amount of square feet. They needed office space. We've seen that shift very significantly. That's true everywhere, by the way, because of the effects of the pandemic, because the shift to hybrid work, to telework, large office-based employers have a glut of space right now. And we're just not seeing a lot of big economic development projects looking for that kind of real estate. I would say, even though I've put a ton of focus in today's presentation on advanced manufacturing, in part because you guys are a strong manufacturing region, but also because of the preponderance of those kinds of projects in the pipeline right now, I will also just remind you guys, longer term, tech will continue to be a big driver of job growth in Virginia, so we can't take our eye off the ball, really need to focus on the talent side there. And then lastly, I'll just say there's a massive shift happening in the automotive sector, with most automotive companies saying they want to be all electric vehicle 2035, 2040. Huge amount of capital investment going into the ground right now. New plants, new battery facilities. We're going to be seeing a significant amount of battery recycling as well as this market matures, and that's a big part of why we're seeing so many mega projects right now. So that's kind of the big picture as I see it. I'm sure you guys have some questions, but I'll just tell you, it is such a pleasure to be a partner to you in this work, to be here today with all of you. I'm really looking forward to the next few hours. I'll tell you, one of the things that makes this special is that we really do get to enjoy a very special state, and with a lot of really special communities, a place where you can not only do amazing things in the economy, but where you can enjoy a great quality of life and develop some great friendships by working together. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
We want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. That's the really fun part about being together face to face. So anyone with any questions that you'd like to have, just raise your hand and we'll bring you the mic. Rich?
You talked a lot about growth in jobs. Can you talk a bit about the trend over the last 4 years in the quality of those jobs? How do you measure the quality of the jobs that you're bringing to Virginia?
Well, I would say a couple of ways. One is that I would just say in general, there is this kind of fundamental test, I think. If an employer is going to locate in Virginia, there is a business analysis that leads to a conclusion that says, if we go here, we're going to be able to attract people here. I mean, that is always, almost always the number one concern for the business decision makers. And so I think part of it, to answer your question, is to say there's a certain amount of faith in the market, if you will, because for people to choose to work at the facility, to fill that new job, it has to be a better fit for them, including consideration of compensation and benefits than whatever they had access to before. So that, I think part of it is just kind of trusting the market. But I will also say that the other big way is that performance measure that I was describing earlier. So when we say we want to make Virginia a leading state for job growth, we're not only measuring the quantitative, if you will, measure of how many jobs does Virginia produce on a percentage basis compared to other states. We're also looking at the growth in median earned income. And so that is a key performance measure for us. So it's not just about leading America in jobs on a kind of quantitative basis, it's also about leading on a qualitative basis. And so you might say, well, how do you operationalize that when you're looking at a deal? A big part of it is that to qualify for most of our economic development incentive programs, the business that receives the incentive, or the community that receives the incentives, it needs to be a project that with jobs that is paying above the prevailing average wage. There are some exceptions to that prevailing average wage test for communities that tend to be distressed. So if you have a community where there's just kind of a dearth of job opportunities, you can make some exceptions. But in general, we operationalize it by looking at the delta between the prevailing average wage and the wages that the project intends to pay, and that the project is held accountable for paying. Yes?
Here, I'm coming.
Mike is coming around.
Is there any research in Virginia on the impact that gig work is having on early career and potentially the middle of the workforce, and how the impact it might be cannibalizing some of the jobs that we have available?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a great answer for that. I would assume that there has to be some research. It's something that I looked at a few years ago. When I looked at it a few years ago, one of the big findings was that a huge chunk of gig workers are using that kind of employment as sort of excess income. So they've got kind of their day job, if you will, and are using gig work to make a little bit of extra money. Take that as kind of just a very partial answer. What I can do is afterwards, if you give me your card or something, I can put you in touch with our research team who might have a better answer for you. Yep.
Hi.
Hey, morning.
Are you able to tell us the migration? It's good to see the migration going on up and down the valley. Can you tell us what of that is retirement people moving in versus, younger families, home buyers, that type of thing? Because we are a big retirement target now. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say I could probably tell you a little bit about that, but you're probably going to get a better answer if we kind of polled this room. And the reason I say that is the migration data, it tells you this much, but if you begin to double click, it becomes really unreliable. And there's two big issues. One is that this data is very lagging. So I'm showing you the latest, but it's really hard to get a sense of what's going on right now. The other thing is that when you sort of double click into what's going on in a particular locality or region, it begins to get really, really thin, and so it's really hard to dive into some of the questions that you're asking. So I would say you're probably going to get a better answer just by talking to real estate people and others who are kind of in the mix locally.
Good morning, Jason.
Morning.
Something we have talked about, and we talked about this yesterday in a board meeting, was child care, also elder care, and how that will feed right into these things right here.
Yeah.
Any ideas of incentives or subsidies that would be available to help out those that can employ, that would maybe raise the wages, get people that are there, because obviously with head counts, you can only have so many children per this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And the female population is obviously severely impacted by this right there. They're usually the ones that take the brunt of this. So that's been one of the best solutions we can come up with so far.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it's really. Let's see here. Yeah, it's not what I wanted to show. Yeah, it really goes back to this issue. You ask the question, well, gosh, what does it take to get more workers into the market? And there's not a silver bullet solution, but clearly one of the big ones is childcare. I will just say I don't have a great answer. I don't have the the stone tablets of childcare or whatever. But I will say that I think the solution is going to vary a bit by region. One region versus the next tend to have. I mean, they're all struggling with it, but the capabilities that are in place locally. The way that different employers are engaging, the philanthropic support that's available, the availability of models that can be expanded, that varies considerably. I don't know that there's kind of a well-articulated sort of state plan that's kind of ready to roll, but I know it's something that a lot of significant people at the state level are thinking about. Yeah.
I think we have time for one last question. Anyone else?
Thank you. Is that on? Jason, thank you very much. That's really a great presentation. Interested, at the Chamber, we're also talking about what does this community look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and looking at us really being designated more as a manufacturing kind of area versus Northern Virginia, a technology-driven area, and Amazon moving headquarters there and driving that technology in this direction. Do you all see an evolution in terms of what we look like 5 years out and how we might want to plan for that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Scott. Let me first of all thank you for your leadership, for helping to pull today together. I would say first of all, it's always important for me to say on these kinds of questions, we at VDP really want to be responsive to your aspirations. So, we're definitely like focused on certain things, but as you interpret that, a lot of that is just driven by what we've heard from Patrick Barker and other partners around the Commonwealth about the kinds of things that would be exciting for their regions and their communities. So let me first of all say that. But to answer your question, I do think that there's going to be an evolving opportunity set. Certainly, you have some strengths in advanced manufacturing, and I think I would encourage you guys to think about how do you sort of nurture and expand and kind of deepen that ecosystem in advanced manufacturing. But I think one of the big things that's happening, and one of the big places where Virginia is advantaged generally, is that we're really seeing kind of a marriage of manufacturing and tech. And when you think about just our economic geography as a country, so much of the great manufacturing capabilities that have been that have developed over the last many decades are sort of in the southeastern United States. I mean, you think about like the automotive corridor, for example, and where we're building things. A lot of it is in the southeast. And you think about tech. I mean, obviously there's a West Coast hub in Silicon Valley and also Seattle, but Northern Virginia is really, and Virginia generally, is America's East Coast tech hub. And in this context where you're seeing the marriage of manufacturing and tech, where more and more manufacturing companies are relying on programmers and other technology workers to drive their innovation, I think Virginia is very well positioned, and I think your region is really well positioned in that respect. I would also say you're seeing more and more data center activity. Look further west, look further south. I also think you guys offer a very high quality of life here, and so there's going to be a variety of other more sort of office type opportunities that you may be able to compete for, particularly given your proximity to Northern Virginia, its global connectivity, including airports.
One more, Jason.
Yes, Julie.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm with the local building association. So of course my question is, with the growth, economic growth that we're hoping to experience here, is there any concern on your part about the lack of trade education or getting workers in that trade field and realizing that they can have a really good quality of life within that career field?
The short answer is yes. It is massively, massively important, and a big place where we need to put more emphasis on the skilled trades. I would say, I mean, any region in Virginia you go to, virtually any region in the country you go to, similar questions and similar challenges. That is a huge need for our country right now. Not only to produce, and certainly our state in this region, not only to produce the sort of four-year educated talent that the economy needs, but also recognizing that there's a lot of talent that not only our country depends on, our communities depend on, but also roles, occupations that offer a great quality of life and a great living wage, and we've really been underproducing that for a lot of reasons, not unique to this region or this state, but certainly a place where we need to redouble our efforts. One of the things that I'm engaged in right now is I'm on the search committee for the new VCCS chancellor. And that's something that is very front of mind for me, making sure that we really think about those workforce skills, not only to connect individuals with those great job opportunities, but also making sure that we think about the talent and workforce pipeline that our economy and that our communities need in a comprehensive way. So thank you.
We're going to take a quick break. I want to just tell you thank you very much for being
thank you,
here.
Cynthia.
Great presentation.
So
We'll take a quick stretch break while we set up the stage for our local forum.
that's great. My contact information is here in case you want to get in touch.
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody saw that the program for today is digital. If you go to our website, regionalchamber.biz, you can bring it up on your phone, read a little bit deeper about our presenters today. Thank you. Wherever you're comfortable.
I feel like the reverend at the
Oh.
church. Do they ever tell you when you're being the preacher at the church, when it's time for the kiss?
Oh, that's right.
Step out. And you guys paint a picture and like, I feel like the reverend at the wedding.
awkwardly in the back or something. So we should say.
I'm excited. Blessed. I've already been accepted. I am bartering my services for things I want. What are we doing next?
Just all right. We're ready to get started. If everyone will come on back into the auditorium.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna have fun. And I'm gonna encourage my team to grow. Okay.
We are ready to get started.
I'm so glad you brought me.
Well, I just don't want to say wrong. I mean, I thought, yeah, it might be worth it. Yeah, he's got it. Jeff's got it. I mean,
A lot of good business going on out in the hallway. I like that. We lost our moderator. He'll be back. You know, I do have a bell, and I just need to start bringing it with me wherever I go. They are a chatty group out there. Remember again, if you would like to see the program, it's digital on the website, regionalchamber.biz, which is the hub of communications for the Top of Virginia business community. Go there for all types of business opportunities, community activities, as well as everything you need to know about the Top of Virginia Regional Chamber. I think Scott is corralling the cats. We may. There he comes. So. Thank you. Yep. And again, my privilege to thank Scott Harvard and the team at First Bank for helping to be the energizer behind this idea and all of their support in bringing this economic summit to our community and helping all of us lift our vision and continue to strengthen our region. So Scott is going to lead our forum today with our local leaders. Take it away.
Thank you, Cynthia. That's working. That's great. I'm really excited to be on the stage here this morning with this group of panelists. They are significant leaders in our community. Their organizations make a significant impact on our community. And as we look at what's going on around us, what the future looks like, I think the insight that we can get from this group of leaders is really going to be helpful to us, particularly as we sit here during all of our strategic planning and budget seasons, and we're looking forward and thinking about what next year might look like and the challenges going forward. So I want to thank each of y'all for joining us today. I don't think that they need an introduction, but I'm going to provide a brief one. I think everyone here knows this group, but Susan Brooks is the Senior Vice President of Winchester Operations at Navy Federal Credit Union. Very involved in our community. I've had the pleasure of working with Susan on the board of the Chamber, among many other things, and just really impactful in our community and a great leader. Susan, thank you for joining us. Mark Nance, who is President and CEO of Valley Health System. Everybody knows about Mark and knows about Valley Health and its impact on our community. And Mark, you've been a welcome addition to our community, so thank you for joining us today. And of course, Jeff Beam, who's president of Howard Shockey and Sons, which is a huge impact player in our community, and I think is pushing equipment and dirt around right across the parking lot for the new hive. So really appreciate the partnership, Jeff, that you and Shockey bring to our communities. I'm going to start. We've got a couple of questions here. If we have time, we'll also open it to questions from the audience. But I'll start with a softball because I want each of these folks to really give you a little perspective on their businesses and its impact and role in the top of Virginia. So Susan, I'll start with you if that's okay. And if you'll just give us a little bit of introduction to Navy Federal and its impact in the community.
Thanks for letting me be here today. Navy Federal Credit Union serves over 12 million members. We have over 21,000 employees with 2,500+ here in Frederick County and growing. We have service our members worldwide. We have a branch network of 355. 189 of those branches are in military establishments around the world, which is our service. And our goal is to be of service to those who are in service. And so we're very proud of what we do for our members and for our team members. We're a Fortune 100 company here in Virginia.
Thank you, Susan. And it's interesting. I don't know that we think about our financial institutions as technology companies, but I know that you couldn't deliver to all of those constituents around the world without significant technology and that kind of commitment. Thank you. Mr. Nance?
Yeah, Valley Health System is about 6,400 people who get a paycheck. If you put that into full-time equivalents, it's about 5,200 full-time equivalents. Over $500 million in payroll. Over $1 billion in total economic impact in the communities we serve. We serve about 15 counties and about 600,000 people. Unique about us is we are a not-for-profit, and so we measure what we put into the community by community benefit. And the community benefit is that care that we provide, which we're not reimbursed for or not fully reimbursed at our cost, and then those programs that we put into the community, and that's about $150 million a year that we put in lieu of paying taxes. And our mission is to serve our community by improving health. I think we do that pretty well. I think we've done that pretty well over the last 30 months during the pandemic. And you can imagine, I really can't imagine what the community would have been like without Valley Health in the last 30 months. So we've been very proud to be able to play the role that we've played.
It was really significant, and in partnership with Shenandoah University, what you all did delivering COVID vaccines was remarkable. I think, frankly, it was the pride of this community as we went around to other parts of the Commonwealth. So
yeah, if there was a championship in Virginia of who had the best vaccine clinic, I think we in Shenandoah and the health department of the Valley did pretty good.
You did indeed, Jeff.
Well, Howard Shockey and Sons is a builder based here in Winchester. We build all over the Mid-Atlantic. Been here since 1896, and so we've seen, and as you can tell by my hair, I've been with Shockey for about a quarter of that. And so we build across the Mid-Atlantic, and we've just seen tremendous growth here in the Winchester area. We employ about 120 people locally, and then we employ hundreds more through our subcontractors and the folks who actually build the buildings for us, who are the really talented people who do the construction work. And so the impact of a smaller construction company in terms of general employment, much smaller than the people next to me, is broad in the sense of subcontracting and all of the trades and the skilled trades that Jason was speaking about earlier. So happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jeff. So you can see why I feel a little puny sitting up here on the stage with this crew. We're going to hear an update in a little while from Tom Barkin, who serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, which of course is raising interest rates to combat inflation. As you look to 2023, how do you expect inflation and higher interest rates to impact your business?
We are seeing the impact right now, especially in housing. As the interest rates rise, less people can afford housing because they used to be able to afford X, and now they can't afford Y. But with Navy Federal Credit Union, one of the things we're doing is making sure that not only our members are set up to thrive in what could be a recession, hopefully short-lived, but that our team members also have that same through education. And you're going to see shift in where our focus is. For an example, Navy Federal offers personal finance management to our members, our 12 million members worldwide, and it's something we're going to see. So we have to look at the business, what the members' needs are, and how that shifts for us, and what they'll be doing to do that. One of the other things is we serve the military, and that military number is going down. You're seeing, just like we are seeing less employees in the market, so is the military. And so it's an adjustment for us from mostly military to the family members, and what do we need to thrive in with them and be their trusted partner as we go forward. But I think one of the things you're going to see is education. We need to shift and adjust for the products and services we offer and make sure that our employees are ready for the what's next. So we're doing a lot of cross-servicing, cross-skilling to make sure that we're upskilling our employees we have to be available. Scott, you talked about the technology and how can we be instrumental in their growth. And so partnerships with the schools is going to be critical for us over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Susan. Mark?
Yeah, I think it helps. It impacts us in a couple of different ways. The most impactful way is the fact that it's, like Susan said, it's limiting my frontline workers' ability to get into the housing market. Because, we have a lot of good paying jobs, but they're those jobs that can get you into that entry-level housing market, and now that, that number has moved. Right. It's hard enough to recruit without affordable housing makes it doubly difficult. The other way it impacts us is we do have a fair amount of debt. We have about $400 million worth of debt, and about a third of that is floating rate debt. So that will be impacted. I don't want to say it's not significant. Every dollar counts, but it'll raise our interest cost a bit. But we've been fortunate in that we've been able to lock in a lot of fixed rates low over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And so our balance sheet's in good shape, but that will incrementally probably pop up a few $1 million in the coming year in terms of our interest cost.
Yeah, it's interesting that that little bit of cost kind of working against a difficult environment for revenues and pressure on wages. I'm sure is you can say you're a nonprofit, but you've got to be sustainable. Right?
Yeah, the bottom line can't be in brackets, right?
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, not for long. And I've got a board member here and 2 board members out there, and we're trying to approve a budget this afternoon. But honestly, it's much more impactful to me that my employees can't buy a home than it is that we're paying a little more interest. I would much rather Valley Health pay a little more interest than I would than my frontline workers not be able to afford a home of their own.
It's interesting. Affordable housing is a huge challenge for not just this community, across the Commonwealth, but I hope we're all listening. I think that's an area that we can really all get behind and try to help alleviate that problem. Thank you, Mark. Jeff?
So for us, the interest rate problem really started, we're experiencing all the same housing issues that we've heard about already, but we really started to see during the COVID crisis in construction, and specifically in a lot of the materials involved in commercial construction, there was a hyperinflationary period that sort of preceded everything that we're dealing with now. And so we were dealing with fixed price contracts, rapidly escalating prices, trying to maintain schedule, all in the middle of the COVID crisis. And since the COVID crisis, now we've seen the increase in core inflation. And so everything from our workers' living expenses to the gas that runs equipment to the, you name it, anything that's petroleum-based, much of which in the construction industry is, we've seen escalation that has caused issues for us as a company. Coupled with that, the full employment that Jason was talking about earlier has really been an issue for construction companies. We build from Annapolis, Maryland to South Boston, Virginia, and every market that we serve, we cannot get enough workers on the job sites. We can't get enough workers for ourselves, and we can't get enough workers for the subcontractors. And so that workforce issue, coupled with inflation, is starting to lead to some real pro forma issues on projects. We're starting to see private projects that either are delayed or, God forbid, that we're going to go forward that simply aren't going to go forward because the pro forma no longer works.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm going to get back to the workforce piece of it. But as you look out into 2023, 2024, what do you see in terms of demand, that is project demand for your organization, or do you have a pipeline that takes you through that? I mean, what do you see? Do you see a softening out there, or do you see continued demand that outpaces your ability to deliver it right now?
Well, we're very blessed. We always call it building a bridge. So we've built a nice bridge of backlog. So we have good backlog, which is great. But those projects need to move forward. And so we see definitely the pipeline is still full. There's lots of work spread across that geography. There are a lot of projects, significant projects that people want to do. But in the last 6-8 weeks, we've started to see developers in particular, some on the industrial side, some on the senior living side, who are starting to say, and some in the multifamily market, who are starting to say, my project doesn't work, or my bank says my project doesn't work. So
there go those bankers again.
And so, that's we're starting to see that softening occurring. So that pipeline that's out there, I'm sure will soften.
Yeah, and we're clearly seeing that at the bank level too. It's just as rates go up, the math's just not working for people. It's an awful lot harder. I'm going to stay with you, Jeff, because I don't think it's fair to make Susan answer every question first. So we're gonna get you to tackle the next one, and you touched on it a little bit. What is the biggest workforce challenge that you're facing today? And as a piece of that, is there anything that the Chamber of Commerce can do to help in terms of supporting or building that for the future?
The biggest workforce challenge we're seeing is sort of threefold. One is there are fewer workers out there, and we talked about that at the macro level a little bit earlier. So we're seeing that. We're also seeing the impact of some 30 years of trying to tell every child they should go to college. And so we've seen across the construction trades, kids who normally would have gone into the trades and normally would have been making a good living at age 19 or 20, but instead have gone off to college. And so we have a shortage of folks there. And then the growth from Northern Virginia that was shown earlier, we just see a lot of, if you squeeze the balloon of Northern Virginia, a lot of that is coming here. So that opens up opportunities for us with construction workers coming this way. But we've always drawn construction workers from the West. The workforce here comes from the West. And as the balloon keeps squeezing to the West, people move further and further away to the point that it no longer makes sense to commute here to build buildings here or to build buildings in Northern Virginia. So labor is a real problem for us. Jeannie Alexander's out there somewhere from Shockey, and she's very involved in the community leadership program here with the Chamber, but it's just a constant battle for Jeannie and her staff to find people. It's never ending.
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to hear that, aren't we? Mark, you want to take this one?
Yeah, it's very easy. A lot of times people ask you what keeps you up at night, and you have to think about it. You don't have to think about it now. It's workforce. I mentioned we have 6,400 people. Right now, I checked it before I came in today. We have 800 open positions. 800 open positions. And they're not, these aren't poorly paying positions. In 2020, January of 2020, our entry-level wage was $12. Our entry-level wage right now is $16. And I had 300 open positions in 2020, and I have 800 open positions now. So the money's part of it, but I mean, that's if my math works right, that's about a 33% increase in our entry-level wage, and we can't get non-clinical entry-level people. And it's funny because it's not funny. It's interesting. I have a lot of colleagues around here that tell me, "Would you please quit raising your minimum wage?" And I'm like, "Well, it's not working." So again, think about that 800 positions, so about a 12.5% vacancy rate. I've been doing this about 32 years. Usually the vacancy rate is 5, 6, 7%. So it really does. It drives us into using what we call agency labor. And again, I'll throw a couple more numbers out there. In 2020, if we spent $800,000 a month in agency labor, we felt like that was horrible, that we were not managing as good stewards. We've averaged nearly $4 million a month in agency labor since the pandemic. I mean, so you think about that, it's almost a 10% increase in our labor just for temporary. Another statistic, and again, I don't want to dominate this, but I got some good statistics and I wrote them down, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And then I'm going to tell you about, I got a special on colonoscopies for anybody who needs one. But just to give you some idea of our hiring data, right? So and Jason made a great point on that graphic. And if I'm reading it right, if I understood it right, for every nurse in a job, there are 29 openings. For every nurse in a job in Virginia, there are 29 openings for a nurse. So when he says we're beating each other up, we are beating the heck out of each other. And they'll go to WVU, and then they'll move over to Northern Virginia, and they'll come to me, and the wage inflation is incredible, particularly for nurses. So in 2021, we hired 175 nurses and lost 250. And most of that 250 went to work as travelers, making 4 times as much as they were making over here. So in 3 months, they could make a year's worth of pay, and then take the rest of the year off. In 2022, which is this is a bit of a leading indicator, I think. We've hired 200, and we've only lost 150, so we're up 50, but we're still down 100. We're still down 25 from last year. If you look at the overall workforce, in 21 we hired 1,300, we lost 1,200. In 22 we've hired 1,400, we've lost 1,000. So there is a glimmer of hope. I would say that some of there's beginning to be a shift. I don't know how long it will be sustained, or whether one data point doesn't make a trend. Bankers know that better than anybody, but I think it is somewhat of a positive indicator for what might be ahead. But it's, again, 32 years in this business, I've never seen a labor market like this, and it's not a sustainable market.
No, it's really not, and it's interesting, a couple of takeaways. So when you've got 39 openings for every 100 positions, you've got people that are doing the work, doing 130% of the work, right? So the pressure on that team and the burnout that's going to occur, and we see it. I mean, we're seeing similar in our organization. And then the other challenge there is that you talk about the number of departing employees, the number of new employees, and over the last 3 years, what does that do to your culture? Because 30% of your team, or maybe 40%, over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, for us it's been about 35%. It's, wow, how do we reinforce that culture that we built for 115 years? It's a real challenge for all of us. Susan?
I'm going to throw out some statistics because I'm not letting the healthcare guy get more statistics than me. So we right now have 301 jobs posted in our campus. And they are not low-paying jobs. They are IT jobs. They are technical jobs. They are leadership jobs across the board. Let me just give you this statistic. One of our interns from James Madison did a study on daycare. For every 3.79 children that need daycare in our area, there's 1 slot. So just think about that. So 3 kids need daycare, 1 gets it. So people are not going back into the workforce. And it's not just women. The families are deciding who is going to go back to work, who is not going to go to work, or if they're going to go at all, because daycare expenses are through the roof. So daycare is a huge issue. Public transportation. If we have an ability in this area to get public transportation so people can get to and from work, it's huge. But I'm going to give you another statistic. We still have so many people from this area commuting to Northern Virginia for work when we have jobs right here. And so we have got to get away with the chamber, got to get away to tell our residents that we have these industries that are in your back door and no need to go over the mountain because we're here. And so statistically, if we could at least get the people who are residing here to work here, it would be amazing. But daycare, I know for us, is the #1 issue. And one other thing, we're trying to attract 5 generations. We're trying to lead 5 generations who are requiring 5 different things. And so as a business and as a leader, you have to be flexible and show agility to get what people want.
And some of those generations are not as flexible as others.
That is correct. I didn't say that, you did. Quote Scott Harvard.
Be nice, Susan. And hand that microphone to Mark, because we're going to let him we're going to see what kind of statistics he has for this. So, to be in the roles that these folks are in, it really takes vision and looking out over the horizon in terms of how to make sure the organization is going to be successful going forward. And you look at Northern Virginia and Amazon expanding their headquarters there, and the amount of growth that's going to drive, and what that may push out in this direction. How do you see that growth in Northern Virginia impacting this top of Virginia region over the next decade? I mean, any strategic sort of viewpoints on what that impact might look like and what businesses should be thinking about, or leaders in this community should be thinking about?
I think overall, population growth is good for healthcare, right? The more people, the more care. I think it'll be a positive. There's definitely going to be a positive halo impact. I think as we start, what should we be thinking? I go to the airport a lot. And my wife and I often kid ourselves that it takes 20 minutes to get out of Winchester and then 30 minutes to get to the airport. Because no matter which way you try to leave Winchester, it's hard. It's hard. And I think, if you ride down Pleasant Valley on a Saturday when the entire region comes to Costco, I really think we've got to think about our infrastructure, particularly the entrance and the egress in and out of Winchester, I think, to the infrastructure. The other thing is, for a healthcare system to thrive, we need all 5 of those generations, right? So if you grow certain segments faster than others, it can disrupt the equilibrium. For example, Valley Health doesn't make money on Medicare or Medicaid. We barely cover our cost or slightly less. So we make money on commercial patients. So if our growth is completely lopsided towards Medicare, then that's going to put more stress on Valley Health, which will probably raise the commercial premiums at a higher rate than it would be if we had a more balanced growth in population, if that makes sense. Again, not every patient is created equal. And so I think for us, we want to see not just a growth in retirement communities, and again, I don't want to offend anybody, but this is the first community I've been in where nobody wants to build a school, because we just want people that don't have kids, and I think I grew up as a Baptist, and we had really good preachers. The good preachers said we need a strong nursery. Because if you don't have a strong nursery, you don't have a strong church in the next generation. And I never realized that. It's like daycare. But I mean, we do have to think about not just growing what suits us right now. We got to grow for the future, which I think is a multi-generational growth, and you want to promote this quality of life across the board. So I think we need to be planning in that way, and we have to talk to each other, you know, respectfully about it, because I know there's some strong feelings about what we should and shouldn't develop, but it's not good for all businesses to just pick one part of society that we're going to recruit. And so that gives me pause, and that certainly is shaping how we're trying to build our organization for the future to handle whatever patients come at us. Does that make sense, Scott?
It really does. Yeah, I think it's a great observation. And you talked about transportation, and am I at home? Sounds like my dog barking. At any rate, you mentioned transportation and infrastructure, and you know the chamber, as they've looked at their prioritizing some of the advocacy, that's really at the top of the list as we look forward and talk to our legislators. I know Bill Wiley's in here somewhere. It just continues to come up to the top of the list in terms of the needs of our community. Jeff, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. I would build on something that Mark just said, and I think needs to be said today, which is Interstate 81 has to be improved. It is the first for me. But you know, we've seen this massive growth in manufacturing and warehousing opportunities, and from a construction standpoint, as an industrial builder, that's been awesome for us. But I've traveled Interstate 81 every day of my life for the last 35 years, and it's just brutal now. I travel 95, I travel 77, I travel them all, and it's every bit as bad as anything we used to complain about. And if something isn't done about 81, people are going to stop coming here, whether they come here to live, come here to work, come here to distribute their their wares. They're going to stop coming because it's not reliable at this point. Something has to be done.
You're right. It's really at capacity, and it's going to grind to a halt if we don't do something bigger than fix an interchange.
And then I would just add that we've seen, especially Winchester Public Schools has a great CTE program. So in terms of that growth from Northern Virginia and continuing to grow our workforce, you know, there are programs already in place here that are being noticed across the state and beyond that are going to help in that regard. And so continuing to put emphasis on those programs is going to be really important.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Susan, you want to give us a little bit of thought on this?
Yeah, I just think the partnerships are going to be crucial, you know, too, with the school systems. You talk a lot about the school system. They said in 10 years, 40% of your job force is going to be Gen Z, which means Alpha's coming after them. So you have to look at what's coming next to prepare today for what's coming tomorrow. So there is the infrastructure here, daycare. How can we partner with the businesses? How can we help with the schools and partner with the schools? Navy Federal is doing a lot with the CTE programs, both in Frederick County and Winchester, to prepare the next workforce. But we have to find ways to recruit for the future that we have never recruited before. And so recruitment to me is going to be crucial. And how do you tell people our story? How are we telling people the story of the Shenandoah Valley and what it has to offer to get them here?
And how does that generation hear it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Thank you all for those comments. Let's wrap up with one final question. Finally, what is your outlook for your business over the next 2 to 5 years? Mark, you've got a mic handed to you. You want to take that one?
I'll be happy to.
I'll give you a few minutes.
You know, I'm normally a very optimistic person, but I think folks may or may not know this, but Valley Health has basically existed on a government subsidy for the last 30 months. The government has provided us about $140 million in assistance, whether it was the Provider Relief Funds, the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan, or FEMA. And without those funds, over the last 30 months, we'd have lost $100 million. That's real money. I mean, on a good year, Valley Health would make about $25 million to put back into the company, put back into the community. So I don't see any more federal assistance on the horizon. So that gives me a little bit of a bleaker outlook. I also think that this labor disequilibrium is not a 1-2 year thing. I think it's a 3-5 year thing. And so since 50% of my cost of goods sold is labor, and my revenue is fixed, those things, when you put all that together, pre-pandemic, my costs have gone up 30% since pre-pandemic. My revenue rate has gone up 5%. My rate is set 50% by the federal government and 50% by contracts that are negotiated years in advance. And it will take me years to negotiate contracts that reflect the increase in my cost. And so when you put all that together, that's a turnaround or a dig out that is not a 12-month turnaround or dig out. I think it's a 2 to 3 to 4 year before we get back to something that looks like 2019. So I say that sounds negative. The good news is, at least for Valley Health, our organization is strong. We have strong ties in the community. We've got a great board, a strong balance sheet. We can weather the storm. It's just going to be stormy for the foreseeable future is the way I would describe it.
Yeah, it's a tough environment. If it helps, I'll let you know that some of us are paying your contractors a lot more this year than we did last year, and maybe some of that will start coming to you next year and the year after.
We can only hope, but we'll see how that goes, won't we?
Yes. Jeff, you want to answer this one, and you kind of touched on it a little bit in terms of what next year looks like, but looking out 2 to 5 years for your business?
Sure. I remain an optimist, and we see a good 2 to 5 years out. We still, from a business standpoint, we see lots of strong demand out there throughout the markets that we serve. So for us, we grow incrementally, regionally. We just continue to do the 5 sorts of buildings that we build very well, and we continue to do them a little further away from home. We're going to be able to continue to do that. What we won't be able to do is a wholesale expansion that would involve, new offices further away than that, for instance, or opening because there simply isn't workforce to do it. So we still see opportunity out there. I think the interest rate environment is going to, and what we see tomorrow with the next inflation print and all those sorts of things are going to bear on whether those projects move forward. As long as the rates stay at a place that allows the pro formas to move forward, there's plenty of work to move forward. There's a desire to move forward. It's just being held back right now.
Yeah. Well, this is probably an unfair question for you, Susan, since you're going to retire at the end of this year. We don't want you to tell us what you're going to be doing with your grandchildren in the next 2 to 5 years, but what your outlook is for Navy Federal and that business.
I think for us, it's kind of twofold. We have our members who need us to be something. So our products and services have to move, and we're looking forward to what we need to offer to remain competitive and be there for our members, be of service. For our team members, it's the same thing. We have to hear all 5 of those generations. These guys, they all know I have 3 words this year. It's invite, engage, retain. I want to invite you to work with us, and when you're here, I'm going to engage you on your level. I'm going to meet you where you are because I want to retain you. And so it's our 3 words for this year. They're all fighting for it, but I think it's what we need to do 3 to 5 years out. We need to invite, work together. I'll invite you guys to Navy Federal to come and see what we have and invite you, but we want to be engaged. We need to be engaged with the community and our volunteerism with the chamber to retain this community for what we know it is and what we have grown to love, and that's the partnership. So I think there is so much opportunity. I am an optimist because if it's not there in front of me, I'm going to make it so. I just think we have, you can look at this as a time of challenge, or you can look at it as a time of opportunity, but it is going to be a huge time for change.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to our panel. You did a great job. Do we have time for questions, Cynthia? if anybody has a question for the panel, they knew my questions in advance, so they've got to be, they got to be friendlies. Astrid, I think they're bringing a mic to you here.
This has been fantastic. You all have really given us a lot to think about, but I had one question that I haven't heard anybody talk about, and that is our immigration here. We have an underground economy of Hispanics that want to participate, and I want to know, what are you all doing to bring them into the light?
Okay, well, that was like a setup, because yesterday we just met with Diana. She works with Laurel Ridge, with the Small Business Association, about how we can partner not only in volunteerism with, and we asked her this, what does the community want to be called? And she'll say the Hispanic community, because it encompasses a broad base. But it's how can we be available to help them gain employment? How can we be available to help small businesses grow? Because small businesses are the bread and butter. And so what I'm going to say to you is there are so many things. She told us about a Facebook group that is available for all of us to use to help the Hispanic population know that we have jobs to apply for and to gain access into the small business associations that they have too. So we are all in.
I'll just go back to the fact, we've got 800 open positions. And the unique thing about healthcare is we take care of all God's children, whoever walks in the door, and it doesn't matter if it's Hispanic or white or African American, whatever it is. And so we really work towards our workforce mirroring the community. Our largest minority workforce group is Hispanic, and we are very much encouraging more and more of that, particularly in the schools. Valley Health is very involved in the local schools, trying to stimulate interest in healthcare careers. And like Jeff said, not everybody needs to go straight to college. Sorry, Tracy, if you're still back there. But a lot of folks can start with a CNA, a certified nurse assistant, and work their way into a degree. And so we're trying to stimulate interest, particularly in the minority community, about going into the healthcare professions, because people come in the emergency room, they need to see somebody that looks like them, at least some people that look like them, and to make them feel comfortable and for us to deliver on our mission. So it's a priority for us. All DEI initiatives are for Valley Health, and we've got a long way to go, but we're mindful of our gaps and deficits, and we're committed to trying to fix them.
Yeah, I would just, construction has long been reliant upon and very engaged with the Hispanic community, and that continues today. What we're seeing, though, is a big shift. At first, construction was an entry point for the Hispanic community, but we've seen a huge shift over to business ownership and entrepreneurial pursuits by the Hispanic community, so that we're now on a very regular basis subcontracting with companies that are owned by Hispanic families and Hispanic organizations and so forth. So it's long embedded both with Shockey and with construction at large, but it's advancing exactly the way you would expect to see in America. It's creating opportunity that goes beyond just working.
Yeah, it really is, reflects the workforce and reflects our community. Banking, on the other hand, has generally been a more exclusive as opposed to inclusive business. Since I've been in the business over the last 2 decades, it really has begun to change. And in our bank, for instance, we're targeting bilingual employees, and we found very quickly that opens up the door to that community because there's comfort, there's somebody that understands their needs. It's fun to watch our team blossom and change as we include more people. Candace Davenport, who's in the room here, keeps me very focused on inclusion, which we think really begins to drive diversity across our workforce. We partnered with the Bank of Clark County and the Bank of Charlestown with $1 million minority business loan fund, interest-free, 0 interest loan. that we've almost hit our cap on. We established it about a year ago. And besides helping these businesses, it's helping us understand the businesses. So we like to talk about the fact that we're on a journey. And we're trying to figure it out, Astrid, because there are huge opportunities for us to grow our workforce and grow our business too. I think we probably need to wrap, don't we, Cynthia? Thank you to our panel. We really appreciate y'all. Did a great job.
I am going to use that as a little segue. On December 5th, the Chamber will be hosting a pre-legislative event like we do annually. This year, we're going to bring in our federal legislators. So newly elected Ben Klein will be there. And then we have invited Senators Kane and Warner. They are not able to be here, but they will be sending legislative aid. So this is a good question that we need to tackle on the federal level. So bring any other questions that day. We're going to take a quick break, just a stretch break while we change the stage. Thank you so much for your all's participation today. We appreciate having you and your keen insight. programs in our state. I have 4 children. My 3rd child wanted to go the CTE route, and his automotive technology teacher told me, "You are my problem," because I did not want my son to take the CTE route. I wanted him to go to college first. Unfortunately, he convinced me. He went on to a career technical school with automotive industry, and once there, he realized he had the aptitude and the desire to go on to college, and he's working on his engineering degree while working full-time for Toyota in research and development. So I just want to encourage all of you parents, let your children follow their dream. Let them work with their hands. It is the good thing. I've lost Mr. Harvard again, so here he comes. I'll also take another moment of the platform as long as Scott's on his way up. I have been in business since the 1970s, and as I was sitting here listening, I realized that every decade I have been through either a downturn or a pandemic or a business crisis. I have walked the peaks and the valleys of business, and I want to encourage you, do not lose hope. Hope and hard work are what keep us going. I've literally saw the business I was involved with 2 different times almost end, but we stayed at it, and they are a successful leading manufacturer here in Winchester Day. So have hope, work hard. And now, Scott Harvard.
Thank you, Cynthia. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Tom Barkin has been president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond since 2018. Tom serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, the Fed's chief monetary policy body, and is also responsible for bank supervision, which means he supervises me. We try to behave ourselves, as well as the Fed's technology organization. He is on the ground continually in the Fed's 5th District, which includes North and South Carolina, D.C., West Virginia, Maryland, and of course, Virginia. In fact, this is Tom's 2nd trip to Winchester with our Chamber of Commerce since taking on his role with the Fed. Tom, thanks for coming again. Before joining the Richmond Fed, Tom was a senior partner and CFO at McKinsey & Company, a worldwide management consulting firm where he oversaw their offices in the southern United States. Tom earned his bachelor's, MBA, and law degrees from Harvard University. We're fortunate to have Tom join us today at Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia, for the Chamber of Commerce first annual economic forum. Today, inflation is running at rates not seen since the last century, yet unemployment is near record lows, and the Federal Open Market Committee raised interest rates last week by another 75 basis points to their highest levels since 2008 as they take steps to reduce inflation. Today, Tom will provide his perspective on the challenges facing our economy and the challenges faced by the Fed as they work to reduce inflation without crushing what has been a very strong economy coming out of the pandemic. Please join me in welcoming Tom Barkin.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Okay, so the last time I was here was June 2020, and Scott was reminding me of it. I had to talk my loving spouse into letting me out of the house. But for those of you who drive through Richmond, you know we have a beautiful ivory tower in Richmond, and I just figured I couldn't understand the economy from an ivory tower. So you guys were nice enough to open up a chamber meeting. If I could take you back, it was a Zoom session, of course, from a golf course. What was the name of the golf? Shenandoah. I didn't get to play any golf. I just got to sit in the room and do it. And then we had the first luncheon I did post-COVID, which I think everyone was 25 feet apart. And so we did sort of a lunch. And so it's just a joy to be back with you guys. And I always appreciate being able to learn from what I'm hearing. So I'll talk a little bit about what I think I'm seeing in the economy. But I'm really interested in what you guys think you're seeing. And that last panel was great. So I got a lot of free advice from it too, I thought. So I want to talk about the question I think I'm getting the most these days, which is when are we going to get back to normal? And I'll give you my views. These are not the views of Jay or anybody else in the Federal Open Market Committee, but I'll give you my views and then let's kick it around a bit. So I want to start by reminding you of where we've been. First of all, the decade before the pandemic was the most stable decade we've had in any of our memory in economic terms. GDP grew consistently somewhere between 1.5% and 3% a year. Jobs were added in every month between 2010 and the start of the pandemic. Core PCE inflation stayed in the very narrow range of 1% to 2%. Home prices grew 46% in that decade. The S&P increased an amazing 270% in that decade. So that was what we were experiencing before the pandemic happened. Of course, since the pandemic, what we've had is historic instability. And just to take you back through your memories, at first demand cratered as COVID paralyzed the economy and millions lost their jobs. Then consumers adapted. They had stimulus, they were stuck at home, and they decided to spend heavily, but not on services, on goods. Eventually, lockdowns lifted, more stimulus arrived, and vaccines rolled out successfully. And you had a bunch of consumers with excess savings who spent euphorically. At the same time, supply chains were constrained. Manufacturers couldn't keep up with booming goods demand, and they struggled to forecast and to operate supply chains, which it turned out were incredibly complex. Transportation networks became overwhelmed, and businesses were buffeted by a whole series of additional events, like the severe winter storm in Texas, the fire at a chip plant in Japan, the ship lodged in the Suez Canal, the bird flu outbreak, and most consequentially for the economy, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A shortage of labor made these things work, and we heard a little bit about it today. At first, the challenge on the labor side was sick or quarantined workers, but there were non-health issues too. Immigration dropped, child care and elder care responsibilities ballooned, retirements were pulled forward, and even once COVID protocols were lifted, businesses didn't see a full return to pre-pandemic capacity. Even now, employers are struggling with productivity as new workers try to fill gaps left by those who retired or quit. Now, there was a resulting imbalance between supply and demand, and that brought high, broad-based, and persistent inflation. The PCE Expenditures Price Index, which is the one the Fed focuses on, is at 6.2% headline and 5.1% core, and both of those numbers are near 40-year highs. And with inflation rearing its head for the first time in decades, it reminded all 5 of today's generations how much we all hate inflation. Inflation creates uncertainty. Price rises unevenly, and it becomes unclear, when do you spend? When do you save? Where do you invest? Inflation's exhausting. It takes effort to shop around for better prices. Firms don't like having to negotiate with insistent suppliers and then turn around and handle complaints from unhappy customers. And inflation feels unfair. You might have earned your wage increase, but it feels arbitrarily taken back from you at the gas pump. So now COVID seems largely in the rearview mirror. Cases are down, the economy is fully open, fiscal stimulus is waning, the Fed is increasing rates and reducing our balance sheet, supply chains are healing, commodity prices have dropped. We've seen over 4 million jobs added back to the economy year to date. So after 2.5 years of instability, we're all ready to get back to normal. But what's normal? So I'll just say normal is not going back to where we were. And just a few pieces of data for you. Goods spending is up right now, even after all this, 8% over its 10-year pre-COVID trend. Recreational goods are up nearly 36%. Clothing's up 17%. Personal care products are up 12%. For sure, some amount of the COVID spending has cooled down, for example, in furniture. But many pandemic habits seem to be sticking around. People got new household companions, whether that's new pets or new plants. And spending in both categories is up, 9% in pets and 28% in plants. People got new hobbies. Spending on sporting equipment is still up 32%. They picked up books, where spending is still up by nearly a third. On the services side, services spending has nearly recovered, not quite, to its pre-COVID trend overall, but there's still pronounced shortfalls. Personal care services are down nearly 21%. Recreation services and transportation services are both down about 10%. My wife has gotten pretty good at cutting my hair. My kids are streaming movies, not going to the theater. And workers have reduced commuting on public transit. The labor market has responded as well. As e-commerce grew during the pandemic, transportation and warehousing employment did too. That's up nearly 13% since February 2020. In contrast, employment in personal care services and arts, entertainment, and recreation are both down nearly 7%. And even in sectors where spending is normalized, the labor market has changed. For example, spending on food services and accommodation is back to pre-pandemic levels, but there's still over nearly 1 million fewer jobs in this sector. Don't expect hotels to return to daily cleaning, and don't expect restaurants to get rid of those little scan things where you actually pick up the menu. Childcare remains more than 8% below its pre-COVID employment level, and employment in local education is down almost 4%. We found in COVID that both sectors had tough working conditions and inflexible pay, and that may have convinced some of those workers they have better alternatives. So if we're not at normal now, so if we're still far away from normal, we should acknowledge normal is not where we are today, right? Much of today's economy is still somewhat artificial. Americans still have about $1.4 trillion more in savings than they did pre-pandemic. This cushion came from stimulus, and it came from lockdown suppressed spending, and it is still supporting consumer demand today. So is increased debt, as consumers have rebuilt debt that they paid down during the pandemic. Fiscal stimulus has lessened, but it's still continuing to go into the economy. For example, the outlays coming from the infrastructure package, the potential implementation of student debt relief, tax reductions in many states, and the release of the strategic oil reserves. Supply chains are improving, but slowly and inconsistently. The New York Fed's supply chain index has come down significantly, but remains elevated. Relative to sales, retail inventories are still well below pre-COVID levels. Businesses remain vulnerable to labor shortages. They remain vulnerable to whiplash as demand forecasts evolved, as has happened rapidly in retail. And they're vulnerable to additional geopolitical disruptions, like those that have affected oil and wheat. The distance we still have to travel is easy to see if we talk about houses and cars, which are two of the pandemic economy's poster children. As demand has outstripped constrained supply, house prices today are up over 40% from where they were pre-COVID. New car prices are up nearly 19%. Both of these are interest-sensitive sectors, and as we heard earlier, Fed rate hikes are likely quieting demand. Supply is being rebuilt, but slowly. We're still waiting for chips to get into cars and windows into homes. So an imbalance remains, and it looks like that imbalance will linger. Household formation during the pandemic added to unmet housing demand. 2 years of car buyers have struggled to find a new car. And that's all at a time in which houses for sale are down nearly a third from pre-COVID levels, and auto inventories are down nearly 80%. It's little surprise neither has yet seen prices normalize. So getting to normal is still going to take some time, and it's unlikely to be without challenges. I might mention 4 of them. First is that getting to normal sounds like a good concept, but it's not great for everybody. I liked the book Balkan Ghosts, and there's a characterization in that book. It argues that every country in the Balkans feels entitled to the territory it occupied when it was at its zenith. And part of the reason you have so much conflict there is everyone is all competing for whatever territory they had when they were at their peak. And I suspect those in the economy who accrued gains over the last 2 years feel the same way. The S&P is down 20% year to date, but it's still up 18% relative to the end of 2019. Will investors overfocus on the loss and pull back? Corporate EPS rose 18 percentage points between the last quarters of 2019 and 2021, but it's pressured now. Will companies cut back in order to preserve elevated earnings? Second, getting to normal may expose vulnerability. Leverage issues may come to light. Take, for example, what happened in the UK a few weeks ago with the announcement of a package of tax cuts. Government bond yields spiked. Pension funds faced losses on leverage return strategies called liability-driven investments. The Bank of England had to step in and buy bonds to stabilize the market. While no similar vulnerability has yet surfaced in the US, after the housing market experience of 2008, you can never be too careful. Third, getting to normal may leave the economy with its potential constrained. And we talked a little about this earlier as well. The economy's operated with a growing labor force for decades, but we may well be entering an era where labor is structurally short. We have about 3.3 million fewer workers than we would if we still had our pre-COVID employment rate. For those over age 55, That number is about 1.4 million. And compared to our 10-year pre-COVID trend, we're missing about 500,000 prime-age immigrants. Retirees tend not to re-enter the workforce, and immigration levels don't look likely to change materially. And even beyond those two issues, the math of our demographics is inexorable. Fewer workers will constrain our growth until businesses and government can deliver productivity enhancements and/or structure incentives to bring more workers into the workforce. And finally, and maybe most proximately, getting to normal may well lead to a downturn. The Fed is taking strong action to combat inflation. We've increased the Fed funds rate to just under 4%. We've started reducing our balance sheet, and we've signaled that more rate increases are on the horizon. But the tools we use to quiet demand and return inflation to our 2% target operate with a lag and have been challenged by the artificial elements of today's environment. Excess savings have sustained consumer spending. The tightness of the labor market has made employers reluctant to cut back. Commodity price pressure remains from the war in Ukraine. Housing and auto shortages have kept pricing high. As a result, bringing supply and demand back into alignment may require still more from us, and that creates risks to the broader economy. But the one place you shouldn't worry about getting back to normal is inflation. Now, getting back closer to normal is going to help the Fed fight inflation. With demand, supply, commodity, and wage pressure easing, the economy should get into better balance in the months to come. But I expect that process to be a lengthy one, as these artificial pressures take time to settle and geopolitical risks continue, most notably recently OPEC's decision to further cut oil production. This slow return to normal levels of inflation could threaten the stability of inflation expectations. And if there's one thing we learned in the 70s is that the Fed cannot let inflation fester and expectations rise. If we back off for fear of a downturn, inflation comes back even stronger and requires even more restraint. And that's why the Fed is not waiting around for things to settle on their own time. And I felt like talking to the panel earlier and saying that interest rates are a risk, but sustained elevated inflation might actually be a bigger risk. And we're not taking rates up because we like taking rates up. We're taking rates up because we are the guys who you need to tackle the inflation that everybody hates. We know inflation's painful. We know everybody hates it. Congress has mandated us to maintain stable prices, and we're doing what it takes to get inflation back to 2%. So that's one place I can assure you we will head back to normal. And with that, I'm open to comments, questions, and insights. Anything on your mind? Yeah? Sorry, we're going to make you run around with the mic, I think.
Thanks for being here. I have a question about what's going on in China and how the constraints of the last couple of years, what they're doing with zero COVID, has caused a lot of manufacturers to rethink where their manufacturing operations are and the trend towards onshoring that we're seeing, and how you think that may affect not only the U.S. economy, but the economy here in Virginia.
Well, there's a lot in that question. I'll see if I can grab it. Well, first of all, if there's one thing COVID has done that has probably been, over the long term, a benefit for us, it's exposed the design of supply chains in this country. I mean, it seems crazy now to think that we thought it was a good idea to put all of your manufacturing in China, or to have all of your chips made out of Taiwan, or for Germany to have all of its energy produced in Russia. I think the companies I talk to have said, we now know we need to diversify supply chains. I think that's very clear. It's complicated because China actually is a low-cost manufacturer. And so to the extent that you're in competition, if your competitors are there and you're not, you're taking on some risk by moving out of China. But I think broadly, I'm talking to companies diversify out of China. I will say that bringing manufacturing back on shore, that's happening a lot less. Where you hear it, of course, is in the defense industries where they're mandated to be on shore, and to the extent they found any vulnerability, they'll bring it back on shore. You hear it some in health, because obviously masks and gloves and trying to get those from overseas during a pandemic didn't make much sense. But I think people really struggle with the idea of bringing manufacturing back on shore when they can't find enough labor to operate the facilities they have on shore. And I think that labor shortage that I talked about earlier, that does seem to be the fundamental constraint. Now, there are a lot of factories in the world where it's mostly robots and not a lot of workers. Those are the ones more likely to be here, but I still hear people struggling with the labor situation. So I hear a lot of people diversifying from China into Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia. I hear a lot of people nearshoring to places like Mexico in the aftermath of the USMCA. But I'm not hearing a ton of bringing it back to the U.S. I think labor is the issue. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you want to call people? Why don't you call people and I'll just find them? Okay.
Thank you. So you mentioned 2008. I'm glad you did. We've seen volatility in the markets that we haven't seen since that point, and a lack of liquidity, which your colleagues have mentioned. However, after mentioning that, they seem to say that core markets are operating well or functioning well. My first question is, what indication or indicators do you look at to determine that the markets are in fact operating well? And secondly, given the fact that a large number of mortgage originators or institutions are non-depository, so non-banks, non-credit unions, is there any concern with their operations given the fact that they depend on that market liquidity?
Yeah, so in the first question, and you're obviously close to markets, I might try to explain a little for folks who are less close than you are. The Fed's not particularly focused on the equity markets or the stock market. So when he's talking about the market, he's talking about the bond market. And in particular, the Fed is the fiscal agent for Treasury, and so most of the transmission of our policy is done through rates by banks, ranks in the bond market. And so to the extent the Treasury markets are not functioning well, that does become a challenge in terms of the transmission of the policy that we're trying to send out. In March of 2020, amidst all the COVID shutdown fervor, the Treasury markets really did malfunction. And that was a place where we did intervene and intervene pretty aggressively. That's not our objective. Our objective is to let markets function. And so the things you watch, in particular, would be things like bid-ask spreads. So can you find a buyer on the other side or not? I want to emphasize that to the extent that bid-ask spreads go up because people are more uncertain about the future, that's not our problem. That's how markets ought to work. To the extent that bid-ask spreads go up because the Japanese, there was an article in the Journal today, might be withdrawing somewhat for that. That's markets operating. But if the markets really aren't functioning, that is a problem that we pay attention to. There's been a lot of work done on Treasury market reform, and I would just stand in support of that, because I don't think we should be intervening. I think the Treasury markets ought to work. It is the U.S. government's obligations. We ought to be able to find buyers and sellers for it. But there are some technical reasons I won't get into why that market has not been working as well as it might. You mentioned mortgage backs. I'd actually expand it. You know, one of the challenges that we have in terms of financial stability in this country is that there is a banking system, which the bankers here will attest is highly regulated by a set of regulators who are paying a lot of attention to leverage and credit risk and cyber risk and those sorts of things. And then there is another sector of the financial system that is unregulated, that is where assets have increasingly been moving. And I do think there's some value to having a broader and a look at those things, so that if there are non-bank mortgage originators, they have to deal with the same sort of liquidity inspections that the banks have to. Not because I want to regulate them, but I just think if you want the economy to be stable, you want to go where the leverage is, and you want to make sure you've got those protections. And so that's going to require, that's not something we can do unilaterally. Congress has to do it. But I'm very supportive of the notion of a level playing field for people in those industries, just to make sure, I mentioned the UK thing. I mean, that's kind of strange. You have these leveraged assets out there that most people didn't even know about. Okay, that's not exactly how you want your economy to function. And that is what happened in 2008, is you had these highly levered CDOs and CDO squareds that most of us didn't even know existed, and that's what was the big issue.
Now, I'm sorry, I'm over here.
You got it, okay.
Thank you so much for being with us. To follow along in the banks, could you comment on the premise that I've seen and studied a little bit, that prior to 2008-09, the Fed operated on a foundation of scarce reserves? I think your balance sheet was about $800 billion, and the banks had relatively scarce reserves. that we're now in an area of abundant reserves, with I think close to $5 trillion on your balance sheet, and the bank's pretty flush. How high do rates have to go to incent banks not to loan that money or invest it and spur the economy and hence inflation?
How much do rates have to go to encourage banks not to loan the money? You mean to loan the money?
To hold the reserves.
Well, I think if rates go up, banks have more incentive to loan the money, right, as opposed to hold the money. So I just want to make sure I got the question.
Yes.
Right.
And I'm just thinking that if we're in this era of abundant reserves, there's a lot of cash, along with the M2 money supply, which you mentioned, which most people don't realize is so high. How do we bring that back down?
Okay.
It would be my question.
All right, so I'm going to try to answer your question, but if I don't get to it, it's not because I'm not trying to get to it. So feel free to ask a follow-up if I miss it. So the first part you went is reasonably technical. Basically, the way we used to set the Fed funds rate is as being active traders in the Fed funds market. And so, we would buy or sell Fed funds as required to get the overnight rate of interest, which is the thing we govern, to a level. The Fed funds market has gotten significantly less liquid over time, and Congress passed a law in 2007 allowing us to move to a different regime, which is called setting interest on excess reserves, and that's what we do today. We basically set the interest that we pay the banks on their reserves, and that seems to flow through very nicely to the Fed funds rate. So we think of it as technical because it's just a different way to get to the same outcome. The implication of having it, though, is banks have more reserves. Okay, so that's the technical part of it. When the markets malfunctioned, earlier question, in 2000, we started pouring money into those markets to make them effective. Subsequently, we continued buying assets in an effort to move the end of the yield curve down. And so we have, I think the number is somewhere in the mid-8 trillions on our balance sheet, and the banks have about $3 trillion right now in reserves. If you go back to the end of the last tightening cycle, I think banks had something about 1.2 trillion in reserves. So there are more reserves in banks right now than they probably need. And we've announced a program to allow our assets to roll off the balance sheet, which would allow the banks to reduce their reserves over the next 2 or 3 years. And so that's what we're doing to reduce the level of reserves. I don't think, though, that level of reserves is, I don't think the banks are impinged by their ability to lend right now by reserves. I think as rates go up, that makes lending somewhat more attractive. Unfortunately, as people start worrying about credit risk, that makes lending somewhat less attractive. And the banks are all trying to sort through in their own ways how they address that balance.
Okay. I'm lost. I'm really lost.
Do you want another technical question about reserves? Or?
No, I feel like a jackrabbit in the headlights. What I really need to understand is you've given us some incredible statistics, and I'm thinking, this sounds good. This is going up. Supply chain's getting back to normal. It's taking a little time. But what's happening? What is an investor to do? I mean, the stocks are volatile. The bond market's not acting normal. I mean, are we headed for a recession?
So
help me out here.
Can I answer the recession question as opposed to what's an investor to do? I think you need to figure out. I think you need to figure out what's an investor going to do.
Please, I'd love to know.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying that the phrase "Are we in or headed toward a recession?" has gotten so popular, and the debate has gotten so intense that Wikipedia has suspended editing on the page defining a recession because it's actually become a, politicized word. So let me just talk about growth, right, and what's happened. Because we're in the middle of a tightening cycle. By the way, on a historic basis, having a 3.8% interest rate is not a high interest rate. Any of us who were around in the 80s and 90s will know that. And that's what the rate is right now. It's 3.8%. But growth is definitely slowing. One of the complicating factors is that, and that's what I was trying to get to on this topic of normalization, is slowing off of what base, right? Is the right housing price where it is today? And with the right, or is the right furniture sales what it was in the middle of COVID? Is the right golf equipment sales what it was in the middle of COVID, or is it some other base? But it's definitely slowing. But we're still in a place where we're adding jobs in the most recent report at 3 times the level of workforce growth, right? We're adding, consumer spending is still in real terms the last couple months around 4%, right? So what's happening right now is not, a recession. It's slowing growth off a base. Whether we have one going forward, though, I think is a very open question. And I would remind you that most recessions are caused by outside events. We talked about the financial stability issues in 2008, in the housing market. 9/11 was obviously relevant in 2001. The S&L crisis was very relevant in 93. The Arab oil embargo in 1973. So outside events are a big deal. If anyone tells you they can predict a recession, then you go, well, how in the world are you predicting outside events, right? It also could happen, though, because the Fed's efforts to bring inflation under control mean you have to quiet down the economy somewhat. And we'll see about that. I think the answer to whether Fed efforts are going to be implicated in that is highly related to how malleable do you think inflation is going to be to supply chains healing and to commodity prices coming down and to labor markets normalizing and the like. And I think that is a question we're trying to figure out. When I'm talking to firms and talking to consumers, what I hear is everybody's talking about the question of a recession. Most people have opened up page 1 of the recession playbook for a company that is discretionary spend or maybe a hiring freeze. Advertising is being cut. I think that's relevant to what's happening with some of the tech companies. But I don't hear anybody turning to page 4, right? Layoffs at scale. Yeah, and I think part of the reason for that is demand's still pretty good. Why would I go to page 4 if demand's still pretty good? Part of that is because I just worked like a dog for the last 24 months to get my complement back, or in the hospital business, not quite back to where it was. Why would I lay people off now if I don't have to? Am I going to be able to get them on the other side of it? So I think there's some caution in people's minds about turning the pages of the playbook. But if something happens from outside, if everyone starts to move at once, you know how it is. People will turn it. So I don't think we're in one now, but I can't tell you we're not going to. We'll see. We'll see.
Hi. Given your extensive background in the Fed markets, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how the Fed, how you guys navigate, kind of walk the line, so to speak, with these alternative currencies that have been highly marketed as again another form of payment, and how do you guys look at that issue?
Well, let's see. I guess you can think of these alternative currencies as an asset class, or you can think of them as a currency. And so as an asset class, should I invest in Bitcoin or whatever? That's not much overseen, but to the extent it is overseen, it's overseen by people who aren't us. We don't oversee asset markets. Per your investor question before, the value of something is what somebody else is willing to pay for it. Knock yourself out. I don't have a point of view on that. As a currency, right, the Fed, issues and puts into the mint prints, and we put into circulation the U.S. currency, and we're the guardians, if you want to think about it that way, of the dollar. And so we take the currency stuff very seriously. We've put out a paper, if you're really interested in January, talking about our thinking about a Federal Reserve issued currency, digital currency. And that paper, which I won't bore you with, says a few things that might be interesting, like you want to be thoughtful if you're going to issue one about the impact it would have on the banking system. There are folks who sort of say one great thing about a currency would be every individual could have an account at the Fed. We're not a consumer-facing institution, but everyone would have an account at the Fed. The risk of that, of course, would be if you had a financial crisis, then all the money would come out of the banks and go into the Fed. And how would you feel about the banking system then? So you just have to be thoughtful about that. It says things like you have to be thoughtful about privacy. China's talking about a digital currency, and that might be great for China, but if your use case is to track transactions of each consumer in the economy, how do the people in the U.S. think about that? And I think it does make the case that we should only issue a new currency with the support of the legislature. And I think the legislature's going to be interested, what's the business case for a new currency? I mean, the only business case I personally can come up with is what I call the Starbucks business case. You're not going to know what I'm talking about, but what I'll say is the following. 20 years ago, I didn't think anyone would pay $6 for a cup of coffee. But today, I guess everybody does. I don't know. And so I don't quite see the business case for a digital currency. I mean, we've already got one. I've got $100 in my pocket and more than that in the bank, and I pay all my bills electronically, et cetera, et cetera. Barely use cash anymore. But if the whole world decided that for whatever set of reasons, just like they want to pay $6 for a cup of coffee, they want to use a digital currency, then of course you don't want competing currencies out there in the US. That doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of what we're trying to do as a country. There is some history of that. There were a bunch of state currencies in the 1850s and 60s and 70s. Every state had their own currency, and eventually the federal government came out with its currency. And that was the winning currency because it was backed by the federal government. So maybe we'll see. Yeah.
Tom, thanks for being here. We heard earlier from Mr. Nance that the impact of federal spending, to our local hospital system. In the recent years, we've had a huge increase in, federal spending going on. What do you envision the impact is going forward on our economy, and what policies might go into, absorbing that amount of spending that's been pretty significant lately?
Well, I don't even know who's leading the Senate and the House right now, so I'm not sure I could predict the direction of federal spending. I think there's a pretty wide bid-ask spread in terms of where spending might go. And I'll leave that to the people who you're electing to make those decisions. For monetary policy, we kind of have to take fiscal policy as given. We don't control it. We don't determine it. That's in a whole other branch of government. And so obviously, if you run bigger deficits, that has more fiscal impulse, which creates more inflationary pressure. If you run lower deficits, that create less. If you do more to free up the supply side, like I said before, getting more labor into the workforce, that'll create less wage pressure. If you do less, that'll create. So I think, but whatever it is, we have to take fiscal as a given and then make monetary policy against that. And again, I just come back to, what's clear to me is that everybody hates inflation. And we were talking about the challenge of getting housing. And I think interest rates are a challenge for getting housing. A bigger challenge is that house prices are up 40% versus what they were 2 years ago. So, I think people don't like inflation. It doesn't allow them to do what they want to do for the reasons I talked about. I think the one tool that seems operational to do something about inflation right now is monetary policy. And so that's what we're doing. And if there's more inflationary pressure that comes from fiscal, then we might have to do more. And if there's less, we have to do less. But we can't solve that problem. We just have to deal with the environment we're in.
Any other questions?
Yep.
Thanks for being here. With people still having savings from the pandemic, like you've mentioned, and still spending those savings, and the labor shortage causing incomes to continue to rise, do you think it's a good possibility that mortgage rates could be well over 10% next year?
You thinking buying or selling? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't know. My personal hypothesis is that we're on the back end of the inflation stuff, not on the front end of the inflation stuff. My personal hypothesis is that commodity prices seem to be cooling, supply chains seem to be easing up, that excess spending is being spent down, and the Fed is raising rates and doing what we need to do about it. So my core hypothesis is that we're bringing inflation down, not having inflation go up. But I think anyone here who wants to forecast the future has to be humble about the challenges that we've had in forecasting the last 2 years. So could something happen that would do that? I think about the Russian invasion of Ukraine last February and what that did to oil prices and food prices, right? Could something like that be out there? I don't know. I mean, that's the risk.
I've got one, and I hope it's a fair one. If it's not, I'll get the stink eye from my regulator. But it.
Thank you for the quality job you're doing of regulating us. That's where you wanted to start.
Exactly what I meant to say. Thank you, Tom. Am I turning red? But I see the dot plot that shows kind of what individual members of the committee estimate rates might be a year out, 2 years out, some quarters out. And as I recall, maybe there's an average where it hits as high as maybe a 5% type of rate, or there's a bundle of folks that see maybe a 5% rate out a year and a half from now, perhaps. What would a dot plot look like if the question was unemployment?
Okay, so again, for those of you who are not as intimately knowledgeable at the Fed as Scott is, what my colleagues and I do every 3 months is we do forecast the future. And the task we're given is forecast the next 3 years under appropriate monetary policy. Okay, so the forecast on unemployment includes what you think monetary policy is. And so there is some, they move together in some way. And I won't get this perfect. This is all findable on the Fed's website. But, the median of my colleagues suggested that inflation would persist longer than just this year. I think the median for, our target's 2%. I think the median forecast for inflation next year was somewhere in the range of 3%. And so the median of my colleagues had rates increasing. I think the median was about 4.6. That was in September. Jay said in his press conference, maybe it's a little higher now, but we haven't done that forecast yet. And I think the median had unemployment rising from the 3.5% that it was at the time into the low to mid 4s. And there is a very live debate in the economics profession about how much unemployment is going to need to rise for some of this wage pressure to cool and some of this inflation pressure to cool. And there are some people who think, oh, right now there's 1.8 vacancies for every employee. If we, slow demand and just slow the excess demand. I mean, you were mentioning the nurses. That was a very compelling, or maybe that was Jason's president, the 29, or was it 29? Yeah, maybe if we just had 2 people trying to hire every nurse, not 29, that would bring wages down enough without increasing nurse unemployment. That's one argument. Another argument says, hey, historically, you're never going to cool wages without, having fewer people working. So I think that's a live debate. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, sir. I think that's what we've got in terms of questions.
Okay,
Tom,
good.
thank you very much.
No,
We
always
appreciate
great
it.
to be here.
Am I wrapping this up? Thank everybody for coming. We really appreciate y'all participating today. Hopefully this sets the stage for future economic forums like this on the state of our economy, the state of our region, the future of our region. I really appreciate all of the smart, active people participating. Especially appreciate the students showing up. Thank you all for coming. I hope you felt like it was worthwhile and you learned something. With that, I think we are adjourned. Thank you again.